Okay, so this one is interesting because I do not think that I have ever heard any pastor or church talk about this by itself.
Okay.
Without putting it in a, you need to go knock on more doors and make more Christian people.
Okay.
Context.
Gotcha.
So why?
Yeah.
Because all the other ones I'm like,
yeah, you've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean,
I've heard, or I definitely haven't heard, and I know why.
Right.
But this one, I don't know why. Like, why is this not a thing?
When you asked the question, I mean, I was looking at it on the notes. I was like, man, you're right. I've never heard a sermon on this. And I've actually never, this is actually, I can only remember teaching Proverbs 6 one time. And
you read that one earlier?
Yeah, the one about the ant.
Okay.
And you know, look at the way the ant works, da-da-da. And that was actually for a children's lesson, for a children's class I was teaching. And that was like the verse for that lesson. And so, but I was sitting there thinking about it. I was like, I think that's the only time I've ever taught this. I've actually never taught it from the pulpit, and I've never heard it taught from the pulpit. Now, I've heard it in the context of like, don't be spiritually apathetic. Like I've heard that, like, don't be spiritually apathetic. Okay. But in the sense of like, just being straightforward about, hey, you need, like, don't be slothful, work, care for your kids. And maybe you hear things around that or whatever, but like, not just people just calling people out for being lazy. Like I don't really remember hearing the word lazy too much from the pulpit. Again, except for in like spiritual context.
Right. That's how I've heard it.
Yeah. So I agree with you. So probably need to change that.
Is this like is it not a hard topic, but like even when I sent the notes, you had trouble defining it and figuring out what it meant.
Yeah.
And so is it just a hard thing to talk about? Or does the pastor or whoever not want to
deal with it?
Get on people for being lazy?
Yeah. Well, I think if you're preaching, like, so for example, if you're preaching mostly from New Testament, you don't run across this a whole lot.
Okay.
So you could preach all the Gospels and never really get into the idea of slothfulness.
Okay.
There is one verse in Matthew where Jesus is teaching he's using a parable, and in that parable, he tells a servant, don't be slothful. But that's it. In all the Gospels, is one.
Was Jesus ever slothful?
No.
Not even when he took a nap for 3 days?
All right, we're going to do some deeper theological work on what happened between the death and the resurrection.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not going to get into all that right now. No, he was not taking a nap for 3 days. Just putting it out there, he was not doing that. Okay. All right. And so, but no, he was not slothful. He rested on the Sabbath, but that's very different than being slothful.
So did God after he made everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he actually, so he rested on the seventh day. And actually, it's one of the 10 Commandments to observe the Sabbath. And so we are actually called
How do you do that?
To have a day of rest.
The Sabbath is an abstract idea. How do you observe it?
Well, it is for us. It wasn't for the Jews.
Oh.
It was very concrete. It was from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday.
Okay.
It was basically the equivalent of a 24-hour day.
Still.
Observe, yeah.
Okay.
If you're an Orthodox Jew, you observe Sabbath.
Okay.
And Sabbath is a day of rest, but not just resting from physical work. It's a day of celebrating the goodness of God and providing for you as well.
So what if you lived near the North Pole? Would you just never observe Sabbath because there's no sundown?
Okay. So if you lived in a place, Nate, that was like that, you would have your own ways of identifying a 24-hour window.
You'd have basically like 6 months of Sabbath.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm not saying that. It's a 24-hour
That'd be a long rest.
window. long rest.
Any slothfulness there?
And probably so if you're resting that long.
Right.
But yeah, so that's a 24-hour window where I've called to rest. And I think even as Christians today, we should realize we need a day like that where we are resting, or the Lord would not have called us to that from point one. Like, he knew it was best for us. Like, our bodies need a break, in other words. And I get that you're dealing in that time period with a lot more physical labor. And so the body resting from that physical labor was important. But I think it's more than just the physical part. I think it's the emotional, mental, spiritual body. I think it's all tied together, where we actually need just a day of just rest.
Okay.
Once a week.